Hello and welcome to the first ever Back to Basics with Ross video. And for this first one, we are joined by Richard Denyer from Warrior Prince 3D. Some of you may have met him when I did the demo day at G-Zone in Worthing. If you didn't meet him, you missed out because he helped with loads and loads of different techniques and painting styles, which is where I tend to falter a little bit. So today we're going to be covering a wide gambit of airbrushing, from choosing your model for painting, the areas to focus on with an airbrush, not being annoyed at yourself when you've got to do the fine detail with a paintbrush instead, because let's face it, who is going to have the time or the patience to try and do eyes with an airbrush unless you've been using it for 1,000 years and you're an absolute precision expert, which I think neither of us are. And then we're going to go through periodically with colour change cleans and pack away cleans. So first things first, we got to pick our models.
That we have.
I know which one I would like to do. Okay, so I'm going to go with this one. So what's this model here?
So this is a tiefling / demonoid from Flesh of Gods, one of the races from D&D. A little bit more on the demonic side with the bits and pieces. It is available as a 32mm model as well as a bust version on this. You've got some interesting details on here for the back and the flesh, as well as on the face.
So what are going to be my main areas of concern when it comes to painting this? Because now I've chosen it, looking at it, while it's larger, there is still quite a lot of detail that I'd have to focus on. And
still lots of small detail on it. Your best thing is to identify the areas that you are going to want to do and hit with the airbrush. To be honest, if I was doing it, my areas would be the fur and the detail on the back here, the flesh, the sword, and probably the dress at the bottom here.
okay.
Helps you then to be able to sort of work out where to start first. So if you need to mask, you can mask. If not, you can get around it.
So that means you're going to use this one.
So yes,
tell me about this one.
So this one here, this one is a giant from Cast and Play. It is literally a 32mm scale model, so this will go straight on the table, taking out your D&D party, as it were. With my this one, with all the little bits and stuff around it, I'm basically just going to hit one area, and that is the flesh. My main focal point with the airbrush is to get all the details on the flesh that I want. That way then afterwards I can go around picking out all the little bits of detail with either using the Army Painter speed paints or going through and just picking other bits and pieces out.
So with these two we've got here, who are they by? How can they get their own?
So this one is from Flesh of Gods. This one is from Cast and Play. If you want to get your hands on these models or any others like them or any others from their collections, you can contact myself either through Ross Airbrushing or through Instagram on Warrior Prince 3D, or even check out the Etsy store. There are some options available on there as well.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Okay, so we've chosen our models. Next step, paints. So for those of you who were with me on the demo day at G-Zone, you'll know that Army Painter sent me the full mega set of their air paints. One of the great features of the Army Painter paints at the moment is their Triad system. I've just about got to grips with what that is, but as I've got Rich here today, he's got more experience with using it. So Rich, what actually is the Army Painter Triad system?
So with the Army Painter Triad system, it's a beautiful thing. So it gives you a base, a middle, and a high. So the base is, as it is your base coat. That is usually your darkest coat, your deepest sort of pigment. You've then got your middle coat, which is then for, say, sort of lighter highlights to a degree, on the next layer. And then you have your highlight paint. This is the one you can either go over with a finer sort of highlight details, edging out bits and pieces, or even just as a overall lightening of the entire product.
Okay, so that would work well. Like with yours, you've got mostly flesh. So say, for example, we were doing it green, like an orc or one of those things, you would then use...
So with that sort of thing, you'd slap out the old Savage Green as your base coat, just to cover everything, and then you then use the green skin mid paint. So then what I would usually do is spray from the light source, so you get the highlights to the skin, And then
So spraying from the light source, you mean figuring out where your light is going to be in...
yeah, where your light is going to be, the direction it's coming from, and spraying from that direction.
So say my light source is up here, then I'd be spraying from this direction. So when I'm doing the highlights on here,
Yep.
I'd be spraying down from this way. So this side would be lighter than this side.
That's it.
And that's where the mid and high will
The mid high will come in. Then your high colour there, for instance the feral green, is where you would either lightly go over the same area again from the light source, and then pick out some of the more lighter parts you want to show more area, for instance like the forehead, and usually like the upper pectorals and stuff like that.
I feel like that's going to come in really handy when it comes to doing this monstrosity, which I've just had the chance to look at in slightly more detail, and I feel like that fur looks like it's going to be really tricky to do, but I have a feeling you're going to know a really good way of doing it.
It is going to be easy for you.
Fantastic. That's what I like to hear. Thank you. So I've got my model. I know about the paints we're using. So the next step is, what airbrushes are we going to use? So I'll do this bit, don't worry. This is probably the bit where I'm most comfortable. So I'm going to be using this airbrush here. This is the HP B Plus. It's one of the Highline range, which means it's got a narrow nozzle and needle tip. The B Plus has a 0.2mm needle and nozzle set, which lends itself very nicely to painting models because you don't want massive spray patterns because you're not covering large surface areas. It also has a cutaway, which you can then use that to access the chucking nut to pull back for flush throughs. We also have the preset handle on the back, which is one of the best things on this type of airbrush, because if you're going to want to do lots and lots of really fine work, you don't want to have to keep finding that point and balancing. So you can tighten this up and it reduces the amount of draw you've got with the needle. So just got a small piece of metal there that as you twist this down, it pushes that closer to the chucking nut, giving you less space to move backwards. As well as that, nice small cup. Keeps you in mind for small amounts of paint. You don't want to be using masses and masses of paint because again, lots of different colours, small surface area. So we've got small cups, easier to keep clean, and I will be showing you some colour change cleans throughout. This is one of my favourite ones. This is one of the ones that I use myself. And so we're going to be making the most of this one today. The other airbrush that's going to be used today by my good friend Richard is the Iwata Volt Kustom CS. This is based on the Eclipse CS range. So it has the Eclipse cutaway. It has the same floating 0.35 nozzle and needle set. Has a slightly longer trigger arm, giving you a much longer draw. But the one thing that makes this one different to the normal CS rather, is the cutaway here. What this enables you to do is once you have done some flush throughs and you're doing a particularly heavy spray session, you loosen your chucking nut and you can simply take the needle out through the back to wipe it through, make sure that there's no build-up of paint. Because if you're doing a long spray session, the last thing you need is for the paint to build up, and as it's building up, also drying, because that's a one-way stop to getting your nozzle blocked. So once you've got that all done, you then tighten it up and it's ready to go. So I've picked my paint colours. For the base on this particular one, I'm going to be doing a tiefling kind of red, and I'm told that the red Triad that I've used here is the Hellboy Triad. So basically it's his base colour and his flesh is going to be Hellboy red, which I am all for. And we have also discovered while discussing paints that this bit on top that we thought was a fur cloak is actually attached to his head. This is his hair. So our first thoughts of making it look like a fur pelt have been changed, and so I will likely do that as a black brown kind of mix with highlights and lowlights. So I'll probably do a base in black with some of the one of the brown triads, but that we will come to later. You've done something slightly different though. Why have you got 4 on yours there?
So one of the things I find quite handy, and the videos I've watched basically of doing flesh and that I've learnt my bits and pieces on is starting off from you're doing lighter flesh tones, starting off with a very nice dark colour. So either purple, red, or sometimes even a mix of both.
So what colour have you gone with?
So I have gone with, it's a mid colour, so it's a chaotic red. It's a nice deep dark red to basically give...
Oh, so that's the mid for the Triad.
That's the mid for the red Triad. This will give the base of the skin and the recesses a very dark, a nice base to start from, because when it comes to having the shades and stuff later, it gives it that better aspect for it.
Okay, much in the same way that you've got the primer coats on there, but you've got a light dusting on top.
You've got the light
so
dusting
you can see the dark
where you can see all the dark bits underneath, and in the folds and joins, you'll see more of it with the red helping to sort of accent that.
Okay, brilliant. Right, so you're going first. We're going with the base colour again. We've got the Triad system of the skin colours to the side, but you're not using those yet. You're doing a base colour in carmine red, is that? Or chaotic red?
So this is chaotic red.
Wicked. Please, after you, show me what you're going to want to do. So we've got your airbrush, which is the Kustom CS. Thank you very much, Iwata, for that one. Again, any of the equipment that you see being used here today, you can contact me directly on the via the airbrushes.com website, or via sales@airbrushes.com, or you can contact me on Instagram, which is @Ross Airbrushing, or you can contact Rich on his Instagram, which is
Warrior Prince 3D.
Fantastic. So we're going to do a base color, just doing a little bit. What he's done there, he's used some of the base color plus a little bit of the airbrushing medium, which I believe is the Army Painter's airbrush medium.
That is indeed.
What that is doing is reducing the paint sufficiently to flow through a slightly smaller aperture on the nozzle. As long as you're making sure that you're reducing your paints enough, doesn't matter what you're using, and even if they say they are airbrush ready, a lot of them will still need reducing, because airbrush ready means it will go through an aperture of a 0.5 nozzle, which is something like your Iwata Revolution CR, which is a very, very popular airbrush. Please contact me or look on our website, airbrushes.com, for any further information. So Richard, what are you doing at the moment?
So what I'm doing at the moment is basing with the red, heavily in the darker areas of the flesh. And so, for instance, I'll leave this light patch here on the gut of this beastie, and also the higher points of his pectoral muscles and arm, that is upraised, I should say.
So how much have you actually left on the stomach of your model there?
Just the very highest point, literally just the very highest point of on here. You can see the white still from the
okay,
the zenith. It's also always worthwhile. You've got the darker colour. Give it inside the gob a good spray to get the bases in there.
And that is something to remember when you're using a colour, especially on an airbrush. Make the most of having that colour in the airbrush. So really look at the model you're painting. Look for all the recesses and all the other areas that you could use this as the base for. But also be mindful of trying to minimise the spray that's going onto the areas that you're going to be doing other colours, much like the little barrels that he's got hanging from his belt and the things like that, because you're going to want them to be a different colour. It doesn't matter if you get a bit on there, but the less that's on there, the less of the top cover and the other colours you're going to need. What you'll see here is that, as well as giving it just a gentle coverage in some areas where he's going to be blending the colours, and a heavier coverage on some of the more dark areas, he's also maintaining a set distance away from the model he's painting. Because what you don't want to do is get too close and have the air actually blow the paint that's landed on your model away and end up with wet marks and with spidering. But you also don't want to be so far away that you just give the whole thing and the whole surface that you're painting a gentle dusting in a lovely chaotic red. And I think chaotic red is a very appropriate name given what I potentially will have been doing had he not shown me the specifics for the distance on these models. Another thing that will impact the final finish is the amount of reducer that you're using. You will sometimes want more of a wash effect or just a gentle coverage, so you may want to make it slightly thinner, or as he's doing now with the base cover, you want to make sure it's slightly thicker, so adding a little bit of your reducer straight into the cup and doing what's called a bubble back, which I will show you a bit closer with my airbrush shortly. The bubble back, you send the air through into the cup and then bubbles the mixture of paint and thinner, mixing it up so you don't have to keep using lots of little jars for all the different colours. You can just mix them in cup, and then when we are doing the washouts and the colour changes, that's when you can then do the clean before you move on to the next colour. One thing to bear in mind is with something like the miniature that is being painted now, because of the nature of the painting you're doing, you're not going to need to do colour changing anywhere near as frequently. Certainly not with this particular set doing the skin changes. He's going to be using the darker colour first, then he'll straight away put the base on for the skin colour Triad. Once he's doing that, he'll then be able to build up the layers as he goes, ever so slowly. Because of the fade that he's doing and because he's using the Triad plus one extra as the underneath the base, it's like the sub-basement if you like.
That's it.
He's not worrying about the colour change because he's going to be building the colours gradually. He's going to be doing a blend anyway. So what we're going to do, he's done the first bit. We'll come back to this once he's done the main base cover and we'll have a look to see the difference it makes. So first thing, let's have a look what it looks like now you've got the red on. You can see a little bit there, just pointed at the screen. So there we go, so you can see quite nicely that he's got a decent coverage, but he's not gone everywhere and he's not gone nuts with it. It's just in those areas where it's going to be lighter on the main base from the Triad, so he shines through more clearly. He's left it almost completely void of the red in some areas where it's going to be much lighter. So he's already considering, even though the Triad system is set up for the shading, for the dark, shadows, for highlights, he's added an extra layer to that to really bring out those darks. Right, so while he's doing that, we've got my high and my mid. The base for this is the N Carmine Red, which we have here. And it very handily says base right on the label. So before I can spray, I've got some paint in my cup, but what I need to do is then add a small amount of the Airbrush medium, which is the reducer, the thinner, whatever you want to call it. We pop some of that in, we'll do it with the other hand. Pop some of that into the cup, just a little bit, and then cover the thing with your finger, just give it a little bit of air just to mix in cup. And then with a piece of paper or cloth or whatever you happen to have to side, just check that's coming through nice and clearly. There's no lumps, no bumps. And all we need to do is spray firmer on the darker bits, and then at the top here where we've got a highlight, we want to have a little bit, not too much, because we want to keep the brightness there, but then we want to be keeping it dark in the main body of the model. So we'll give him a nice coverage, being careful not to over drench with paint. and making sure where it's dark, you want to have a darker, thicker coverage, and then the lighter it gets, you want to have a lighter coverage. I'm going to try and keep this on the skin as much as possible, but it doesn't matter if we get a little bit of overspray, because we'll be doing work with other colours on this shortly. So make sure, as you see there, it's far lighter on the top of the head than it is further down the body. I'll maybe need to give it a bit more of a coverage, just to give it that much richer colour. So making sure they've got the coverage, and I've just about had enough paint. So if we give that a moment, you know what, I think it could do with a little bit more just on the top of the arm. Let's see if I've got enough in the channel, or do I need to reload? No, we are good to go. So next, because of the Triad system, you don't need to worry so much about the colour mixing and colour swapping. So we're just going to go straight in with the mid, which on this one is pure red, and it says nice and clearly mid. Pop a little bit of paint in there, and again our airbrush medium. Has to be said, thanks to Army Painter for getting this paint to us so quickly, so we can make sure that when we're showing you these demos, that we're really showing you with the best possible kit. And with their Triad system, it makes things so much more straightforward. None of this colour matching, highlighting, adding a bit of white to it. So now keeping sure that the point at the top there with the highlight, that is the direction of the light, so we just want to use that as the guide. Only a little bit on the darkest bits, because again we want those to maintain their darker colour, but then on the top getting a little bit more. Again, keeping on the direction of the light, so you've still got those darker ridges underneath. One thing you will want to do, if I just put a little light dusting on the face, is if you can, you want to try and get a little detailing on the side of the face and the cheekbones. What I'm going to do before I do that is, using the micro air control valve, I'm going to reduce the airflow slightly so I can get a bit closer. So if I send the air out and then slowly reduce it down until it sounds a little bit different. So it's a bit quieter there, a bit gentler, that about halves the PSI, and then I get right in there and just try to follow the line of the mask and the cheekbones, just to keep that a little bit darker, and then again the same on the other side, just to really bring that out. Again, it's the highlights going in there. You want to again make sure you get most of the areas where the light's going to hit it. One thing you'll notice though, which I will go back to shortly, is I completely missed out the hand here, so I'll go back and I'll get a bit of coverage on that before putting the rest of the mid on. That was an intentional mistake, so I can show you how to recover from it. So just pop a little bit of the carmine red in, a little bit of my medium, give it a little mix, and then what you're going to want to do is make sure that you're spraying as much as possible away from where you've already sprayed. The majority of the hand is going to be fairly dark, so it's not too much of an issue if you get more of the base on. But yes, you might not be able to hear it because I've turned his microphone off, but Rich is giggling at me as we speak from missing out. This is a real schoolboy error, but I'm here to learn, so laughing doesn't help. I would have done exactly the same to him as he's doing to me. So make sure you've got enough of that base on, and then got the base on the hand without putting any paint through, just using the air. Just let that dry a little bit before I then pop my mid back in. And then with the mid, again, really gentle. You just want to be getting and then just finish off those bits that I left once I realised my intentional mistake. Just making sure that all the bits that are going to be skin colour have got at least some of these on there. And there you go. That is mid and base. So what we'll do next is go through some highlights. So there are ostensibly 2 colours on there, not including the zenithal covering with the background, but actually that doesn't look half bad. Right, your turn, sir. Let's get the top layer or the high on. Okay, so while I was dealing with my model, getting the 2 coats of red on, you've already put the next layer, which was the nomad flesh, which is the base.
Yep.
Which is technically the second base.
Yeah, effectively the second base, that's it.
So now we're doing barbarian flesh,
So now,
which is the mid.
That's it.
So let's see what happens with a bit of barbarian flesh on top.
So again, what I'm doing with this one is hitting it at much sort of further away, so it doesn't land as heavy. It's
looking for a dusting. It's looking for a dusting, not a coating.
That's it.
And those bits there, are those the bits that are going to be lighter, or that's more kind of mid-range? I suppose it's the mid-8. So
these are the sort of the ones that are building up to the highest brightness of the highlight. So I'm just going in and giving them a little bit more due attention. So you've got the area on the thigh, the gut, chest, the forehead, and parts of the arm as well.
Okay.
And also the hand.
So just making sure that there's a decent coverage on there in the areas where it needs it. Heavier on the bits where you're going to be fading up to a much lighter colour, and much more light covering on the darker areas. Would that be right?
That's it. And it's like just a little on the heels there. You just do a slight sort of a little bit, so you've still got the dark sort of colours on the bottom of the feet.
So this is one of the plus sides of painting a model that is mostly one colour.
It's also very handy.
So next up, we are on to the wilding flesh, which is the high on the Triad. So how are you finding using the Kustom CS? Because I know that you had tried it from when I did my unboxing.
Very much so, and you might have to search me on the way out, because you know it's a very, very, very beautiful bit of kit, and it handles wonderfully, I've got to say. So this is going for the highest sort of highlight now. So again, we're just going very misting on this one.
So much further, so we've got to draw back a little bit so you can see that the airbrush, he's doing quick bursts rather than a constant spray to make sure that you've got the consistency of coverage rather than building up too much in one specific area.
And what we'll do, literally sort of go in and just slide on those highest areas.
And as he finishes that off, you can see how quick it can be doing these kinds of things, where with using the airbrush and using something that has got the consistency of flow, as opposed to using something like a rattle can, where you will have some inconsistencies with the coverage because you have inconsistencies in the spray. I'm just doing the final little bits just to really give the full highlights a real shine to them. And there we have it. That is very nicely done. Now Rich has finished doing his spray, it's time to clean his airbrush. I'm going to use his as the example, as you'll recognise the Kustom CS from an earlier unboxing video. So the first step you'll want to do is grab your cleaning solution, pop a little bit of it in the cup, and then either use your finger. If you've got the nozzle cap and needle cap in place, you can just use your finger to cover the end, or failing that, grab a cloth, cover the end, then push down for a little bit of air and then slowly pull back to bubble up. That sends some of the cleaning solution through the channel into the cup, making sure that you get the paint come back into the cup. When you've got that, just dump it out, and then you can either repeat the process or pop a little bit more cleaner in, and then with your brush, get into the cup and give it a good old work around, making sure you get all around the edges, because you want to make sure that any of the paint that's on the sides doesn't end up drying and staying there. Now, once you've done that, it's very important, this gets dumped out. You do not want to send that through the channel, because otherwise you're potentially sending dry paint flecks through the channel again. So we're going to do one more quick bubble back. So cover the nozzle, bubble up, dump it out, and then again with the brush, give it a once over, and then pop a little bit more of the cleaning solution, and then with your spray out pot, you just spray it through until it's emptied the cup, and then you should have a nice clean cup. The outside's fine, we'll deal with that shortly. So I'll move these out of the way. So the next thing we're going to do is disconnect it from the air supply. We do not need to be sending any air through it. We're going to take off the moisture trap and put that to one side. Now, as I pointed out during the unboxing video, when you're doing lots of spraying with lots of different colours and you've done a colour change flush through, you don't actually need to take this completely apart to get the needle out. You just need to loosen the chucking nut and then you can pull the needle out the back. For the purposes of this, we're doing a full pack away clean, which means we need to completely dismantle the airbrush. So first we take off the back cover, take the needle out, unscrew the chucking nut all the way. Then we take off the spring guide. And out with it comes, so we have spring guide, spring and chucking guide. Then we take the trigger out, pop that down, and then we have our airbrush body. Now some of the more astute of you will notice that I haven't taken off the needle cap and the nozzle cap. That is because, generally speaking, there is no need to take these off in order to clean your airbrush. it's worth taking them off if you want to check to make sure there has been no blowback or bubble back and there's no paint inside there, which there is not. There's no paint, no paint. So we're going to pop it back because the most important thing to do is protecting your nozzle here, because that's very small and not cheap to replace. If you ever do need to replace the needle on this airbrush, or the nozzle I should say, unscrew it here. This hex nut here has a spanner that came in the box, but generally those will be hand tightened, so you can unscrew it. And one of the great things with the Eclipse series is they have a floating nozzle, so you can just literally pop that off and replace it. For cleaning purposes, you should not ever need to remove the nozzle. Doing so just invites the possibility of getting damage to it, and broken nozzle means broken airbrush. So what I'm going to do first of all is get a can of our liquid reamer, Premier liquid reamer. This stuff is absolutely dynamite. So what I'm going to do first of all is pop a little bit of this through into the cup. If you put the straw right to the end and give it a quick spritz, that coming straight through means that there is no blockage in the cup. You then want just to put a little bit in, and then again with your brush, there it is. Give it a bit of a work around, and usually making the opportunity to get some of that reamer onto the paint on the side. And with your cloth, just move it around. Any excess in there, dump it out. Pop a little bit of your normal cleaner, again with your brush, just to neutralise any of that liquid reamer, because we don't want the liquid reamer to sit in the airbrush. So for the time being, this bit's put to one side. What we want to do now is grab another clean cloth, pop a little bit of our liquid reamer on, and then with our needle, place it flat in the cloth and pinch the needle at the base, making sure that you have a patch of reamer either side of it. And then slowly you twist the needle side to side while pulling it back through that liquid reamer to make sure that any and all paint traces on the needle are completely gone. Because if there is dry paint on the needle, there'll be dry paint in your nozzle. And as we learned earlier, if you put dry paint through your nozzle, you are very likely to block it. So we're going to pop a little bit of the reamer through the chucking guide, because when you've got paint on your needle and you pull your needle out, it passes through the chucking guide, and any paint that's in there will transfer. Just as a point of order, to give you an idea of how much paint was on the needle, that is what was taken off just then when we cleaned it. Finally, you just want to inspect to make sure if you've had a particularly heavy paint session, you can sometimes get some paint come back through the cup into the body of the airbrush. In this instance, that hasn't happened, so we are good to go. But if you need to, just with a cotton bud, get a little bit of the cleaner on, work inside. You can do the same thing on the finer points. One thing that's also quite good to do is you get a bit of the cleaner or the reamer on there and you use this just to go around your nozzle cap, making sure that you're getting around the edges, taking any paint off, but there's very little on there, which is brilliant. Pop that down. So next thing we have to do is put it back together. So the first thing, we want to put our trigger in. Before we put our trigger back, we want to get a little bit of our Iwata lube, just the tiniest of tiny dots just on the end of the piston there. And then, this is going to be the fun bit, doing this while recording. Can I get it into the piston housing first time? You can. Once it's in there, just give it a little few up and downs just to work that lubricant into the piston housing to make sure that stays running smooth. Next, we want to put in our chucking guide. You push the bottom of it forwards, so then it's sticking forward like that, and you put it in like a boot, foot in a boot, put the spring over the top, and then you want to put the spring guide onto there. before you put the spring guide on, what you'll want to do is, in order to protect the seal and maintain decent moving parts when it comes to having to unscrew it again, put a little bit of the Medea beeswax thread sealant around the edge there, and then put the needle, the chucking guide over there, just screw the spring guide in. Again, with all of these bits, that anything that screws on, you want to do it hand tight. Any tighter than that and you are going to cause issues with using the airbrush. We then next just put the chucking nut on just a half turn. And one thing I will do with this particular one, as we've got the cutaway at the back, is to put this on before the needle, because this will actually help you guide the needle in more securely. So we put the back of the airbrush on and tighten. Again, doesn't need to be tight, it just needs to be sealed. We have an O-ring here, so as long as that is engaged, we are good to go. And then we just follow that channel through and put the needle in. And then, very importantly, tighten up the chucking nut until that is secure. The best way to check that's been done right is the needle pops out the back. Once we are done there, just inspect the exterior. If necessary, give it another little spray with a little bit of the liquid reamer, and then polish with a cloth. Next video you'll see will be taking apart and cleaning the Iwata HP B Plus. Okay, I've cleaned his brush. It's now time to clean my brush. I have been using the HP B Plus. As you can see, I've been using a fair amount of red on there, but it's time to give this a bit of a clean. So first things first, what we want to do is chuck a little bit of the cleaner into the cup and give it a bubble like we did with the other one, just a little gentle bubble, and then dump that out. Pop a little bit more of the cleaner in, and again, gentle bubble. And put a small amount of cleaner in again, and this time with our cleaning brush from our Iwata cleaning kit. Get in there and really give it a good old mix around. And then rinse it through one more time. Honestly, you can do that as many times as you feel are necessary, but once you've done a couple of rinse throughs, what we want to do is put a little bit more of the cleaning solution in there, and then with a spray out pot or with a cup with some wadded tissue in, pop this in and spray it through, or you can even just spray onto a blank piece of paper with your canvas. You just want to get that cleaner sent straight through the channel to make sure you're getting enough of the fluid through. You do that once or twice until you're happy with it, and then give it a little once over again with some water just to spread that through. So I made a bit of a mess with my airbrush. Obviously smaller cup, it's easier to slosh over, but also I'm a little bit more haphazard in my airbrushing style. So what I'm going to do is get a little bit more cleaner, only a little bit this time, and again with my brush, just around the outside edge of the cup, and also take the opportunity to put some of that cleaner on to the sides where it's spilt over. Give that a little dump out, but then also you can see there's some paint in the end of the nozzle to get some of that cleaner in there as well. Once you've done that bit, you just grab another cloth and just give it a little once over on the outside, just to make sure there's no excess. And then again, a little bit of the solution, bubble back and dump out. Now, depending on how thorough you've been, this will be varying degrees of clear, but what we'll do is get those covered in the next stages. So we've cleared through as much of the paint as we're going to on this stage. It's essentially, we've done a colour change clean. I'm now going to take the air supply away. And then with my liquid reamer, which you will remember from last time, I'm going to give it a quick blitz both in the cup and on the outside of the body, just to give it a bit of a polish off. Do that a couple of times, and again, once you're done with that, a little bit of the normal airbrush cleaner to neutralise the solvent. Give that a bit of a rub down, just so it's not overly wet when you start to take it apart. As with the previous airbrush, when we did a clean on the Kustom CS, we're going to need to dismantle this. This one doesn't have the handy cutaway at the back, so on this occasion we will dismantle as normal. Back cover, loosen the chucking nut and take that off, pull the needle through, take off the spring guide, and the spring and chucking guide often come away at the same time. There we go. So we have spring, chucking guide and spring guide. And then we take our trigger out, and there's that. Now, as before, we don't need to take this off and take the nozzle off to clean it. We will just take the nozzle cap and needle cap off and gently place that to the side. What we've got here is some paint that has gone through, mostly just on the outside. So just pop a little bit of the reamer on. You can use normal airbrush cleaner, but I quite like the way the reamer just really cuts through it. No messing about. Ooh. Dropping will happen, but that's absolutely fine. And we'll send a little bit of that just all the way through it. Lovely. Before we go any further, I am going to then take this opportunity to pop our cover back over the nozzle, so as to make sure that we don't damage it. The next step, with a clean cloth or some paper towel, get some of our liquid reamer, spray it on a small patch, and then with our needle, put it into the middle of that, pinch the needle, and then slowly pull it back and twist it side to side, making sure to get a good coverage. And I think you'll agree that looks pretty covered, pretty clear. There wasn't too much on the needle there. Fantastic. Pop that to one side. Again, as with the other airbrush, we will want to send a little bit of our reamer through the chucking guide. But what we can also do with this one, as we don't have the bit on the back of, like on the Kustom CS, that allows it to come out easily, we want to send it through the chucking guide backwards, just to make sure that there's no excess paint in there. And that looks pretty clear to me, so I think we got it. So we pop that back down, and then we can just inspect our trigger. It's a little bit of spray over, that's mostly probably from just my thumb on my gloves, so just with a cloth, you can even use the cleaning brush that came, just to get that in there, make sure we're getting it covered and getting the residue of the paint off. Because if you've got a clean outside, the likelihood of having a clean inside is much greater. So we've got all the constituent parts. We're happy those are clean. Make sure you check inside the spring guide, just in case, as I say, there's some spray over. With our liquid reamer, as before, we've still got some paint residue on the inside of the cup. So before we do anything else, I'm going to send some through, as we did with the Kustom CS, to make sure there's no blockage And as I did that, a small spray of red paint did come out into my bin. So that has helped shift a small clog. And then spray it through again with some Reamer on the inside of the cup, and then just go around that with your cleaning brush. Very important step when you have done that is to use some cleaner to neutralize the solvent, because the last thing you want to do is let solvent sit in your airbrush. That is how you dry out and damage your perishable parts like the O-rings, etc. So make sure you've given that a nice wipe over. And again, just to be sure, you can use a cotton bud. Be careful not to go into the hole, but just use it just to go around the outside, just to get those last bits off. There was a small amount on there, slightly pink, but otherwise we are good to go. So now to reassemble. First things first, pop our trigger back in. This one, unlike with the Eclipse series, we don't have the piston attached, so we just need to pop this over the top of the piston housing just in there. You can see the small circular plate, so this goes in, and there's a couple of runners either side, so that's in, no messing. What we will want to make sure we do, as with before, is just pop a small dot of our Iwata lube just on the end here. So then when we do put it back in to the piston housing, we can get some of that lubricant just to make sure that our parts that move continue to move. And what I've done there is put that one back to front, so let's try that again. Anyone else would just edit that out and try that take again. But you know what? These things happen. No mess, no fuss. Next, chucking guide. Push the back up so that it looks like a foot ready to go into a boot, and just pop it in. Making sure that the toe of the boot sticks up by the trigger. We then put the spring on and the spring guide. But again, before we put the spring guide onto our airbrush, we want to pop a little bit of the thread sealer just to protect not just the threading but also the airtight seal, to make sure that it's not going anywhere. Again, with any of the parts that screw on, only want to do them hand tighten. Any tighter and you'll run the risk of damaging a seal or a part of the airbrush that doesn't want to be damaged. We put the chucking nut on with a half turn first. This makes putting the needle back in that much easier. So you just get your ring fingers together and then pop the end of the needle on there, and it just slides straight in. Pop it in, give it a slight twist, make sure it's not too stiff, and then you twist the chucking nut on to make sure that that is moving. Then we pop the back cover back on, making sure the needle goes into the small channel there. And as with before, just give it a little spray with your Reamer and polish with a cloth. And there we have it. That is one beautifully clean, ready to pack away Iwata HP B Plus.